The auctioneer's gavel came down like a thunderclap on the driest afternoon of 1878, and Eva Thatcher felt the sound of it travel straight through her chest and hollow her out from the inside. She stood at the edge of the livestock pen in Harlow Creek, Kansas, her worn leather gloves clutching the wooden rail so tightly that the splinters pressed white crescents into her palms. Around her, the dust of the sale yard swirled in lazy eddies, carrying with it the smell of hay and animal sweat, and the particular kind of despair that comes when a woman has staked everything she has left on a single bid and watched it slip away. The bull she had needed, the big red and white Hereford standing calm as a monument in the center of the pen, had just been sold to a man she had never seen before, not to old Clement Hayes, who would have resold the animal within a week, not to the Dunbar brothers, who she might have negotiated with, but to a tall stranger in a dark hat who had raised his numbered card at the very last possible moment and outbid her by $2. $2. That was the margin between saving her ranch and losing it. Eva pressed her eyes shut for just a moment. She was 31 years old. She had buried her husband, James Thatcher, 14 months ago in the hard Kansas earth after a fever took him in the night. She had a daughter named Clara, who was 9 years old and who still drew pictures of her father with a piece of charcoal on the back of old flour sacks. She had 480 acres of land that the bank was watching with hungry eyes, and a cattle operation that needed a quality breeding bull to produce the kind of calves that would fetch the prices she needed at the fall market. She had scraped together every cent she could manage. She had sold her mother's silver hair combs to a general store in Wichita. She had mended shirts for half the county at 5 cents apiece. She had driven that bid as far as she could possibly drive it, and in the end it had not been far enough. When she opened her eyes, the auctioneer had moved on to the next lot, a pair of draft horses, and the crowd had shifted with him. The pen where the Hereford bull stood was quieter now, attended only by the sale yard workers who were preparing to transfer the animal to its new owner. Eva straightened her back, because that was what she did. She was not a woman who allowed herself to crumble in public. She would walk to her wagon, she would drive the 8 miles back to her ranch, and she would sit at the kitchen table tonight and try to find another way. There was always another way. She simply had not found it yet. She turned from the rail and nearly walked directly into the stranger. He was closer than she had realized, standing just behind her and slightly to her left, and she had to stop quickly to keep from colliding with him. He caught her elbow to steady her, a brief and instinctive gesture, and then immediately released it when she pulled back. "Pardon me," she said, because she had been raised with manners even in the worst of circumstances. "No, ma'am, that was my fault entirely." His voice was low and unhurried, with a faint southern quality to it, like the tail end of a drawl that had been mostly worn away by years of travel. He removed his hat, which she now saw was a deep charcoal color, well-maintained but clearly traveled. His hair was dark brown, and his eyes were a shade of gray-green that she might have found remarkable if she were not so thoroughly miserable at that moment. He was perhaps 34 or 35, with the kind of face that had been shaped by weather and work. Not handsome in a refined way, but compelling in the way that landscapes could be compelling, open and honest and difficult to look away from. She had seen him raise his card at the auction. She knew exactly who he was. She stepped to the side to go around him, and he spoke again. "Mrs. Thatcher," she stopped. "You know my name." "I asked around," he said simply. "After the bidding, my name is Stephen Underwood. I came up from Abilene about 3 weeks ago looking to settle somewhere." He held his hat in both hands, turning the brim slowly with his fingers in a way that seemed like an unconscious habit. "I understand you needed that animal." "I imagine everyone who bid on him needed him," she said carefully. She kept her voice even. She was not going to beg, she was not going to perform her grief for this stranger. "I imagine so," he agreed. "But I talked to some people here at the sale today. A man named Garrett told me about your operation, about what happened to your husband, about the kind of cattle you were running before things got difficult." He paused. "He said you were bidding on that bull to save your ranch." "Mr. Garrett talks a great deal," Eva said. "He does," Stephen Underwood said, and the corner of his mouth moved in something that was almost a smile. "But I believe he was telling the truth. And I've been thinking about it for the last 10 minutes while you were standing at the rail." He looked at her steadily. "I want you to take the bull." Eva stared at him. "I beg your pardon. The animal is yours if you want him," Stephen said. "I'll have the paperwork transferred. You can settle whatever arrangement works for you. I'm not asking for anything unreasonable. But the bull goes to your ranch today, not mine, because I don't have a ranch yet and you clearly do." The world felt slightly tilted for a moment. Eva Thatcher had not received an act of genuine, uncomplicated generosity in so long that she was not entirely sure how to process one. Her first instinct was suspicion, which she considered a reasonable response given that she was a woman alone in a sale yard with a man she had never met who was offering her something that had cost him real money. "Why would you do that?" she asked. He looked at her directly without flinching. "Because I could and because it seemed like the right thing to do. That's the whole of it, Mrs. Thatcher. No strings attached to it." "That is not how things generally work in the world," she said. "No," he agreed. "But it is how I work." She studied him for a long moment. He stood still and let her look, which she appreciated. A man with something to hide would have shifted under that kind of scrutiny. "You said you were looking to settle," she said slowly, "that you came up from Abilene." "That's right. What sort of work do you do, Mr. Underwood?" "I know cattle," he said. "I spent 8 years ranching in Texas before circumstances brought me north. Before that, I worked a few different spreads across the territory. I can ride, I can rope, I can mend a fence line and pull a calf and read weather about as well as any man in Kansas." Eva was quiet for a moment. Her mind was moving quickly, calculating in the way it had learned to calculate over the last 14 months. "My foreman left last spring," she said. "Took a better paying position in Colorado. I have 2 ranch hands, both of them good men, but neither of them has the experience to run the operation the way it needs to be run. I have been managing it myself, which works except that there are not enough hours in a day." Stephen Underwood said nothing. He was listening. "If I take that bull," Eva said, choosing each word with precision, "I need to know there is no debt attached to it that I am not seeing. I am not in a position to take on hidden obligations. I have a daughter, and I have land that I am not willing to lose, and I do not have the luxury of being naive about offers that seem too generous." "That is a fair position," he said. "And you are right to take it. I will tell you plainly that I am not a wealthy man. I have enough to get myself established, but not so much that I can afford to throw money away for no reason. The reason I'm giving you that bull is not financial strategy. It is just that when I heard your situation, it struck me as wrong that you should lose what you've worked for over $2. He settled his hat back on his head. "If you want to offer me work, I'll take it honestly and earn my pay. If you want to take the animal as a gift and never see me again, that is also fine. Either way, the bull is yours." Eva Thatcher took a breath. The Kansas sun beat down on the back of her neck, and somewhere across the sale yard, the auctioneer's voice rose and fell in its familiar rhythm. "I cannot pay a foreman's full wages right now," she said. "Not until after the fall sale." "I don't need a full wage right now," he said. "Board and a fair share when the cattle sell. I'm not going anywhere." She extended her hand because she was a practical woman and this was a practical agreement, and she had learned that sometimes the right decision came disguised as an impossible one. He shook it. His grip was firm without being demonstrative. "Be at my gate by 7 tomorrow morning," she said. "I'll introduce you to my hands and show you the spread." She paused. "And Mr. Underwood, I appreciate what you did today. I won't forget it." "I expect you won't need to remember it long," he said. "Once that bull does his work, you'll have enough to forget all about how you got him." She allowed herself a small, genuine smile for the first time that day. "We will see about that," she said. She drove home in the afternoon light with the Hereford bull secured in the back of the stock trailer that her neighbor old Pete Simmons had lent her, and for the first time in months, she felt something she had almost forgotten the texture of. It was not quite hope. It was something quieter. The sense that perhaps the world was not entirely indifferent after all. The Thatcher Ranch sat on a gentle rise about 8 miles northeast of Harlow Creek, and it was a better operation than many people realized from the outside. James Thatcher had been a careful man, and he had chosen good land well watered by a creek that ran reliably even in dry summers, with meadow grass that stayed green longer than the surrounding country. He had built a solid house, 2 bedrooms and a kitchen, and a sitting room with windows on 3 sides, and a barn that was tight enough to keep animals warm through a Kansas winter. What James had not left was cash money. He had been a builder, not a saver, and when the fever took him in the spring of 1877, the debts attached to the operation were equal to most of its value. Eva had spent the following year paying down what she could and fighting off what she could not, and she was not beaten yet, but she was tired in a way that went beyond sleep. Clara was sitting on the porch steps when Eva pulled the wagon around to the barn. The girl was small for her age, with her father's dark hair and Eva's gray eyes, and she was looking at the stock trailer with an expression of intense focus. "Is that him?" Clara asked. "That is him." Clara's face transformed. She scrambled off the porch and came running across the yard in her bare feet, which Eva had told her about more times than she could count, and pressed herself against the trailer slats to peer in at the bull. "He is enormous," Clara said reverently. "He is indeed. What are we going to call him?" "We are not naming the bull," Eva said, for approximately the 4th time in recent memory. "He is not a pet." "Everything needs a name," Clara said serenely, and continued studying the bull as if she were already deciding what that name would be. Eva unhitched the trailer and got the bull settled in the south pasture with a combination of careful work and a great deal of patience. And by the time she had him secured and had checked his water and feed, the sun was getting low, and the sky over the western fields had turned the deep amber that she had always loved about Kansas evenings. She washed up at the pump and went inside to start supper, and while the beans simmered on the stove and Clara sat at the table drawing her pictures, Eva thought about the man from the sale, Stephen Underwood. She knew almost nothing about him except what she had observed in 20 minutes of conversation, and what she had observed was the following. He was direct, he was calm, he did not appear to need to fill silence with noise, and he had done something genuinely kind without asking for recognition of it. These were not nothing. In her experience, a man's behavior in a single, unguarded moment told you more about his character than months of deliberate impression-making. She told Clara about him over supper, that a new man would be coming to help run the ranch, that he seemed capable, that he had been the one who had the bull at the sale. Clara looked up from her bowl. "He gave it to you." "He offered a fair arrangement," Eva said carefully, "but he gave it to you. He was generous, yes." Clara considered this with the gravity of a 9-year-old who takes the world seriously. "Is he nice?" "I believe he may be," Eva said. "We will have to see." He arrived the next morning at 10 minutes before 7, which told Eva something immediately. She was at the barn when she saw the horse coming up the road, a solid-looking bay with a white blaze, carrying its rider at an easy walk. Stephen Underwood swung down at the gate, led the horse through, and walked it to the barn without needing to be told where things were, which meant he had been watching the property as he came up the road and had read it correctly. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she said. "You found it without trouble." "The directions you gave were clear." He looked around the yard with an appraiser's eye, not intrusive, just attentive. She could see him taking in the condition of the fence posts, the state of the barn roof, the size of the pastures. "Good land," he said. "Your husband had a good eye for it." "He did," Eva said simply. She did not add anything to that, and he did not push. She introduced him to her 2 ranch hands. The first was a man named Roy Caldwell, who was somewhere in his 50s and had been with James Thatcher since before Clara was born. He had a face like carved oak and an expression that rarely changed, but he was the best judge of cattle she had ever known, and he was loyal in the way that only old-fashioned men could be loyal, quietly and completely. The second hand was a younger man named Tomás, who was 26, born in New Mexico, and had come up to Kansas 2 years earlier looking for work. He was quick and capable and got along well with the horses, and Eva trusted him absolutely. Both men shook hands with Stephen Underwood and measured him in the way that ranch hands measured new foremen, which was to say with skepticism held carefully in reserve. She walked Stephen through the whole operation that first morning. The main herd was about 80 head of mixed cattle, with the goal of getting the herd quality up through better breeding. She had 3 horses beyond her own riding mare, 2 of them working horses, and one that needed the kind of patient handling she had not had time for. The equipment was in fair condition, with some repairs needed. The fences in the east pasture were an ongoing problem. She watched him as she talked, and she noticed that he was the kind of man who listened with his whole attention, not waiting for his turn to speak, but genuinely absorbing what was being said. James had been that way too, she thought, and then put that thought away firmly because it was not a useful comparison to be making. Over the following 2 weeks, she observed him in the way that she observed everything important carefully and without rushing to conclusions. He worked hard, but not in a way that was designed to be noticed. He was up before Roy most mornings, and Roy was the earliest rising man she had known. He handled the east fence problem with a competence that impressed her, not because it was complicated, but because he solved it the right way rather than the quick way. He was even tempered with the cattle and with the horses and with the men, and when Tomás made an error in judgment with one of the working horses on the 4th day, Stephen corrected it without humiliating the younger man, which was not nothing. Clara, for her part, decided within approximately 48 hours that Stephen Underwood was her personal favorite person. She began appearing at the barn at odd hours, full of questions about horses and cattle and general ranch operations, and Stephen answered every question with perfect seriousness, which was the only approach that worked with Clara. If you talked down to her, she went cold and distant. If you talked to her like a real person, she would give you her complete trust. Eva watched this from a distance and felt something complicated about it. She was glad Clara had someone new to talk to. She was also aware that she was glad of it in a way that was slightly more personal than purely maternal concern. "Your new man is good," Roy told her one evening when she found him mending harness in the barn. Roy did not say things were good unless they were. "I think so too," Eva said. Roy kept his eyes on the harness. James would have liked him. Eva was quiet for a moment. "High praise," she said finally. "Meant to be," Roy said. On the 3rd Sunday, which was the first Sunday that Eva had not worked through in over a year, she came out of the house in the late morning to find Stephen sitting on the top rail of the south pasture fence, looking out at the Hereford bull that was now moving through the herd with the proprietary ease of an animal that knows its purpose. She walked to the fence and leaned against it beside him, looking out at the same scene. "He is already working," she said. There were 3 cows that she was fairly certain would be producing calves by spring. "By March you should have a strong crop," Stephen said, "if the weather holds." He glanced at the sky in the direction of the northwest, where weather came from in Kansas. "It should hold. The signs are good." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, which surprised her. She was not generally a person who felt comfortable in silence with someone she did not know well. But there was something about Stephen Underwood's silences that was not empty. They were the silences of a man who had things to think about and was content to think them. "Where did you work in Texas?" she asked. "A big spread outside of San Antonio for most of it. Family outfit, 3 brothers running it together. It was good work." He paused. "They sold the place in 1875. After that I moved around some." "What brought you to Kansas?" He was quiet for a moment. "My wife died," he said, 2 years ago. We had no children. The ranch we were building together in the Texas Panhandle felt too large afterward. I needed to move." Eva turned to look at him. He was still looking out at the cattle, his expression calm, but with something underneath it that she recognized. It was the particular quality of a grief that has been carried long enough to become familiar. "I'm sorry," she said. "And I am sorry about your husband," he said. "A fever, I was told." "Yes, he was sick 3 days and gone on the 4th. She said it plainly because it was the truth, and she had learned that there was no way to make such a truth more bearable by softening the edges of it. He was a good man. "I could see that," Stephen said, "in the land and the buildings and the way your people talk about him." "Roy worshipped him," Eva said. "I believe Tamaz would have if he'd had more time." Another silence. The bull moved through the herd with quiet authority, and somewhere far away a meadowlark was singing the late morning song that Eva had loved since childhood. "I should not have told you that at the sale yard," Stephen said, "about asking around about you. I understand now why that would have seemed strange. I did not mean it to be unsettling." "It did seem strange," she admitted, "but I have concluded that your motives were what you said they were." He looked at her then. "How did you conclude that?" "By watching you for 2 weeks," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. "And the verdict?" "You are who you appear to be," she said, "which is rarer than it should be." He held her gaze for a moment, and she felt something shift slightly in the air between them, like the pressure change before a coming storm. Then he looked back at the cattle. "That is one of the finest things anyone has ever said to me," he said. She found herself smiling, looking out at the pasture. "Don't let it go to your head, Mr. Underwood. You are still on trial." "I understand," he said, and she could hear that he was smiling too. The summer moved through its slow heat with a rhythm that Eva had not felt in years. There had been urgency and crisis and grinding exhaustion for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like when a ranch simply ran the way it was supposed to run. Roy had settled into a comfortable working relationship with Stephen, the two of them operating with the efficiency of men who had each figured out which areas were theirs and which were not. Tamaz had stopped being reserved with Stephen around the middle of June and was now thoroughly won over, which was evident in the way the younger man sought him out to talk through problems. The east fence held. The cattle were healthy. 3 of the cows confirmed pregnant by midsummer, which put Eva's calculations on track for the kind of fall calves she needed. And Eva herself, for the first time in 14 months, began to find moments that were not defined entirely by what needed to be done. She found herself staying out in the evenings a little longer than was strictly necessary. She found herself saving interesting things she read in the Harlow Creek Gazette to mention to Stephen at supper, which was a habit she had developed without quite noticing it. She found herself noting, with a precision that she recognized as more than casual, that he was the first person who had ever made Roy Caldwell laugh twice in the same week. The understanding of what she was feeling crept up on her slowly and then arrived all at once, one afternoon in early July when she was in the kitchen making bread and heard the sound of him talking to Clara in the yard, patiently explaining something about the way horses communicated through their ears, and she stood very still with flour on her hands and her heart doing something unexpected. She put it away immediately. She was a practical woman and a cautious one, and she had no interest in making herself vulnerable in any direction that had not been clearly thought through. She had a ranch to save and a daughter to raise and a grief that was still present even if it had become manageable, and she was not going to complicate any of it by indulging in feelings that were probably just the natural result of spending extended time with a decent man. She made the bread and told herself it meant nothing and went to bed that night knowing she was lying. The situation she had been trying not to think about was complicated by the arrival, in the 3rd week of July, of a man named Harlan Briggs. Harlan Briggs was the representative of the Harlow Creek Savings Bank, and he arrived on a Tuesday morning in a black suit that looked thoroughly wrong in a ranch yard, with his hat pulled too low and his manner too smooth in the way of men who had learned to dress up bad news in pleasant language. Eva met him at the front gate, because she was not going to let him into her house. She knew what he was there for. The bank held a note on 300 acres of the eastern portion of her property, and the payment schedule was coming due in September. She had been making payments, but the payments were calculated on projected income, and if the fall sale did not go as she hoped, she would be short. "Mrs. Thatcher," Briggs said, touching his hat, "I hope you are well." "I am fine, Mr. Briggs. What brings you out here?" He went through the diplomatic preamble that men like him always went through: expressions of personal regard, assurances of the bank's wish to work with valued customers, and then arrived at the point, which was that the bank was reviewing its accounts and had concerns about the Thatcher operation's ability to meet its September obligations. Stephen had come out of the barn at some point during this conversation and was standing near the barn door, not close enough to intrude, but close enough to be seen. Eva did not acknowledge him, but she was aware of him there with a clarity that was itself informative. "I will meet the September payment," Eva said. "My cattle operation is in better shape than it has been in 2 years. I have a quality breeding bull working the herd and 3 confirmed calves coming in the spring, with more to follow. The fall sale is going to be solid." Briggs nodded in a way that managed to be both agreeable and skeptical. Of course. The bank simply wants to ensure. The bank wants to ensure that it can call in my note if I fall short," Eva said flatly. "I understand that, Mr. Briggs. I am telling you that I will not fall short. Now if you will tell me the exact figure required by the 1st of September, I can tell you precisely how I intend to meet it." There was a pause. Briggs recalibrated slightly. She met with him for another 20 minutes, standing in the yard in the July sun, and by the time he left she had the specific number she needed and a clearer sense of how thin the margin was. It was thin, but it was not impossible. After his wagon had disappeared down the road, Stephen walked over to her. "Bank," he said. "Bank," she confirmed. "How much trouble?" She told him the number. He was quiet for a moment. "The fall herd is solid," he said. "If we can get 20 to 22 head to market at decent prices, you'll be there." "That is what I calculated. The Abilene market in late September runs strong," he said. "I know the buyers there. I've done business with 3 of them. I think we can get a fair price." She looked at him. "You would go to Abilene?" "I'll take the herd up myself if you want," he said. "Or we can go together. However you want to handle it." She thought about it. A cattle drive to Abilene was not a trivial undertaking for a small operation, but she had done it twice with James. She knew the trail. "Together," she said. "I know the trail and you know the buyers. That is the right combination." He nodded. "Then we plan for it." "We plan for it," she agreed. That evening after supper, they sat at the kitchen table with a map spread between them and talked through the route and the timeline. Clara was in bed. Roy and Tamaz had gone to their bunkhouse. The oil lamp cast a warm circle of light over the map and over the 2 of them, and they talked for nearly 2 hours about logistics and timing and the relative merits of different buyers and market strategies. It was the kind of conversation that Eva had not had since James died. Not because no one else was capable of it, but because there had been no one with whom she could talk about the ranch in both its practical and strategic dimensions. Someone who understood not just the daily work, but the larger shape of what she was trying to build. At one point, she reached across the map to trace a point on the trail route, and her hand nearly touched his. She pulled it back a fraction before contact, and said what she had been about to say about the trail, and her voice stayed level, and she was proud of that. But she caught him looking at her a moment later with an expression that was not quite neutral, and she felt the warmth of the lamp on her face, and thought that this was becoming a more complicated situation than she had planned for. August was hot and full of purpose. The herd was selected, marked, and conditioned for the drive. Roy and Tamaz prepared the trail equipment. Stephen broke the young horse that had needed patient handling, working with it every morning in the south paddock, with a persistence that Eva found herself watching from the porch window more often than was entirely explainable by professional interest. One afternoon she came out to the paddock while he was working the horse, a rangy bay gelding named Copper that James had bought at auction the previous year. The horse had too much nervous energy and had been resistant to anyone except light handling, but under Stephen's patient direction it was beginning to show real promise. "You have a talent with them," she said, leaning on the fence. "Horses are honest," he said, circling the gelding slowly. "They tell you what they're feeling. If you respect that, they'll work with you. Some people are that way too," Eva said. He looked at her over the horse's back. "Are you saying you're honest?" "I try to be." "I believe you," he said. The horse tossed its head and he gave it the extra lead it needed, reading the animal perfectly. "Honesty is a harder quality than it sounds." "It is," she agreed, "especially when you're not sure what the truth is yet." A pause. The horse settled. "That is a very particular kind of honesty," Stephen said carefully. "Yes," she said, "it is." She pushed off the fence and went back to the house, and behind her she could hear the even rhythm of the horse moving in the paddock and the quiet sounds of the afternoon, and she thought that this conversation had said more than it appeared to, and she was not entirely sure how she felt about that. She felt alive. That was the truth of it. She felt alive in a way that she had not felt in a very long time, and it frightened her slightly, because feeling alive meant having something to lose. The drive to Abilene began on the 14th of September, when the morning air had begun to carry the first suggestion of autumn, and the sky was the deep blue of the season that Eva loved best. It was a modest outfit, 23 head of cattle, 4 people, and a camp wagon driven by a hired man named Gus, who was 62 years old and had driven more trail camps than he could remember. They would need 4 days to cover the distance, moving the cattle at a pace that kept them in good condition. Clara was left in the care of her nearest neighbor, a woman named Martha Orrin, who had 5 children of her own and had been Eva's closest friend for the past 7 years. Clara was not pleased about this arrangement, and she expressed her displeasure with an eloquence that Eva suspected would develop into something formidable in 10 years. "I am old enough to come," Clara said on the porch with her arms folded. "You are not," Eva said. "I could help." "You help best by staying with Mrs. Orrin and not worrying me." Clara turned her gray eyes on Stephen, who had the good sense to say nothing and simply tip his hat to her. Clara relented slightly. "You will bring him home safely," she said to Stephen, meaning the Hereford bull which was staying behind with the breeding herd. "The bull will be fine," Stephen said. "His name is Duke," Clara said. "The bull does not have a name," Eva said from the wagon seat. "His name is Duke," Clara said again, looking at Stephen, and Stephen very carefully looked at a point above Clara's head. Eva drove the wagon out of the yard, and when she glanced back, Clara was standing on the porch step watching them go with an expression that was trying to be dignified and not entirely succeeding. The drive was 4 days of hard riding and beautiful country. The Kansas autumn was at its finest, long golden light across the prairie, the grass gone to copper and amber, the sky so clear that the horizon seemed impossibly far away. Eva had forgotten how much she loved the open country when she was moving through it rather than working within it. Stephen handled the cattle with Roy during the days, and in the evenings they made camp on the open prairie and ate what Gus cooked and talked around the fire. Roy and Tamaz told stories. Roy's were laconic and dry. Tamaz's were expansive and comic, and Stephen listened with what Eva recognized as his characteristic complete attention. On the second night, when Roy and Tamaz had turned in and Gus was asleep over his camp coffee, Stephen and Eva sat by the fire and talked until nearly midnight. She did not remember afterward exactly how they arrived at the things they talked about that night. They talked about James, briefly and honestly, and she told Stephen things she had not said aloud to anyone about how she missed his steadiness more than anything else, how the ranch without him sometimes felt like a sentence she had started and then run out of words for. Stephen listened without offering comfort that he could not actually give, which was the right response. When she was finished, he told her about Catherine, his wife, and she heard in his voice the same specific longing, not for the person exactly, but for the particular kind of wholeness that a genuine partnership creates. They talked about what they each wanted. She wanted the ranch to succeed, for Clara's sake and for her own. She wanted to prove to herself and to everyone watching that a woman alone could hold what she had built. She wanted, she admitted slowly, to stop being alone, but she was afraid of what that meant. Stephen was quiet for a moment. The fire had burned down to coals. "I know what that fear is," he said. "I carry it too." She looked at him in the firelight. His face was open and serious and genuinely present, and she thought that she had been half in love with this man since he stood in a dusty sale yard and told her he thought she should have what she had worked for. She did not say that, not yet, but she let herself know it. "What are you afraid of?" she asked. "Exactly." He was quiet for a moment. The prairie was vast around them and the stars were extraordinary. "That I will reach for something good and lose it," he said. "That I will make someone responsible for my happiness and then not be able to keep them safe." "That is not how it works," Eva said. "You cannot keep anyone safe. You can only be honest with them and work alongside them." "I know that," he said. "Knowing it and believing it are different things." "Yes," she said. "They are." She could have said more. There was much more that she could have said. But the night was late and the cattle were settled and the morning would come early, and some things needed a little more time. She stood and said good night, and he said good night, and she lay in her bedroll looking at the stars and thinking that this was the most honest conversation she had had in years. Abilene was exactly what she remembered: loud, purposeful, smelling of cattle and enterprise. A town that had been built almost entirely around the business of getting Texas beef to eastern markets. The stockyards were full and the buyers were active, and the energy of the place was like a physical thing. Stephen knew 3 buyers by name, and he introduced her to all of them. She watched him negotiate with the kind of attention she brought to everything that mattered, and what she saw impressed her without surprising her. He was clear about what he had to sell and what he wanted for it, and he did not bluster or perform the false hardiness that many men used in negotiation. He simply told the truth about the quality of the cattle and let the cattle support what he said. They sold 21 of the 23 head. 1 cow had gone lame on the trail, which they had anticipated and accounted for, and 1 older steer they pulled from the final sale and would bring home for winter beef. The prices were the best Eva had seen in 3 years. She stood at the stockyard office and looked at the numbers written on the receipt and felt something release in her chest that had been locked there since the spring of 1877. "We have it," she said. "Comfortably," Stephen said. He was standing at her shoulder looking at the same paper. She could feel the warmth of him nearby. "Comfortably," she repeated, and she laughed. It was a laugh that surprised her, short and bright and completely genuine, and it made Stephen Underwood smile fully for the first time she had seen, which transformed his face in a way that did something undeniable to her heart. She did not think. She put her hand on his arm just for a moment and said "thank you," and meant it to encompass everything. The sale yard, the months of work, the nights by the fire, all of it. His hand came up and covered hers for just a second before she moved it, and neither of them said anything about it, but the air between them was warm with understanding. They ate supper in Abilene at a proper restaurant, the 4 of them, which was a luxury that Eva allowed herself because she thought they had earned it. Gus ordered pie twice and appeared to consider this the height of civilization. Roy told a story about a cattle drive he had done in 1865 that was more adventure than anyone had bargained for. Tamaz ordered food he had never tasted before with cheerful curiosity. Stephen ate his supper and watched the table with an expression of quiet contentment that Eva decided to simply allow herself to enjoy. Riding home was slower because they were not driving cattle, and they made good time. The first night on the return, Eva and Stephen sat by the fire again, and this time Roy stayed up a little later too, and they all talked together until the stars shifted. Before Roy went to sleep, he looked at Stephen with his characteristically direct expression and said, "You're the best man I've worked under since James." "That is not something I say." Stephen said, "I know it isn't. I appreciate it, Roy." Roy nodded once and went to his bedroll, and Eva looked at the fire, and Stephen said quietly, "That means something." "It means everything," she said. "From Roy." On the second night, they arrived back at something that had been building for a long time. The other men were asleep, and the fire was low, and the moon was full over the prairie, and Eva was sitting on a bedroll with her knees drawn up and her chin resting on her folded arms looking out at the silver grasslands, and Stephen was beside her. "I need to say something," he said, "and I would rather say it clearly than leave it to be understood by implication." "All right," she said. Her heart was doing the thing again. "I came to Harlow Creek because I was looking for somewhere to settle and something useful to do," he said. "I did not come there looking for, I did not plan on feeling." He stopped and started again. "I have spent every day on your ranch these past months being more certain of something that I did not allow myself to name because I was not sure of my right to feel it." She turned to look at him. The moonlight was honest on his face. "What do you feel?" she asked. "That I have never met anyone like you," he said simply. "That watching you run that ranch and raise your daughter and fight for what is yours with everything you have, it has done something to me that I did not expect and cannot undo. And I do not want to undo it. But I know that what you have been through is not a small thing, and I know that this is your home and your life and your operation, and I have no desire to complicate any of that unless—" "Stephen," she said. He stopped. "I have been in love with you since the 3rd week of July," she said. "I have been fighting it with considerable dedication for 2 months." A pause. The prairie wind moved through the grass around them. "And," he said, "and I am tired of fighting it," she said. "I have enough other things to fight." He turned fully toward her, and she toward him, and he reached up and touched her face with the back of his fingers, very gently, as if she were something that might vanish. "Are you certain?" he said. "I am terrifyingly certain," she said, "which is how I know it's real." He leaned forward and kissed her, slowly and with complete attention, and it was nothing like the tentative or desperate kisses of people who are not sure of each other. It was the kiss of 2 people who have been honest about everything and have arrived, through difficulty and patience, at a moment that deserves exactly this. When they pulled back, the prairie was still silver and vast, and the stars were still extraordinary, and Eva Thatcher thought that she had not been wrong about him from the beginning. "I should say," Stephen said, his voice somewhat unsteady, "that I am not a man who does things halfway. I don't intend to be here for a while and then leave." "I did not think you were," she said. "I want to be on that ranch," he said, "with you, for the long term, however you want to define that." "I have a specific way I would like to define it," she said, "but let's go home first." He smiled, and she smiled, and they sat together in the moonlight for a long time. And in the morning they rode back toward Harlow Creek with the kind of ease between them that is only possible when everything important has finally been said. Clara, when they arrived home and Eva told her not everything but enough, looked at Stephen with an expression of supreme 9-year-old satisfaction. "I knew it," she said. "How could you possibly have known it?" Eva said. "Duke told me," Clara said. "He is a very perceptive bull." Eva looked at Stephen. Stephen looked at the fence post. "I thought the bull did not have a name," Eva said. "His name is Duke," Clara said, and walked back toward the barn with perfect dignity. Harlan Briggs arrived on the 3rd of September to collect the bank payment. Eva had the exact sum waiting for him in a cloth pouch, and she handed it to him at the gate with a composure that she felt she had earned. He counted it. He looked at her. "All of it," she said pleasantly. "Indeed," he said. He put the pouch in his coat pocket. "The bank appreciates your reliability, Mrs. Thatcher." "As does the bank appreciate everyone's reliability when they pay," she said, even more pleasantly, and he could not quite find a response to that, and so he simply touched his hat and left. She watched him go down the road, and when she turned around, Stephen was standing by the barn door grinning, which was not an expression she had seen on him often, and which she found she wanted to see considerably more often. "Did you say all of that on purpose?" he said. "Every word," she said. He shook his head and went back to what he was doing, still grinning, and she went back to hers, and the morning went on around them in the easy way that mornings did when everything was right. The question of what exactly they were to each other became slightly urgent in October, when Eva became aware that 3 different people in Harlow Creek had offered varying interpretations of Stephen's presence at her ranch, not all of them charitable. She did not particularly care what people said, but she was aware that Clara was old enough to hear things in town, and she was aware that Stephen was a man of particular honor who deserved to have things defined clearly. She brought it up one evening directly because that was who she was. "People are talking," she said. They were on the porch after supper, the autumn evening cool and dark blue around them. "I know," he said. He was quiet for a moment. "I have an answer to that if you want to hear it." "I want to hear it." He reached into his shirt pocket. He had apparently been carrying something there and produced a small ring. It was not elaborate. It was a plain gold band with a small inset stone, something warm and amber-colored that caught the light. "I bought this in Abilene," he said. "I have been trying to figure out the right moment to produce it, and I have decided that there is no perfect moment and I should simply do this." He was not kneeling. He was sitting next to her on the porch step, which was more honest somehow, more like himself, and he looked at her with the gray-green eyes that she now knew could be serious or amused or tender, and said, "Eva, will you marry me?" She looked at the ring and at his face, and at the dark autumn sky above the ranch that had nearly broken her and had instead become the ground on which something new was growing. "Yes," she said, "I will marry you, Stephen." He put the ring on her finger, and she leaned against him, and they sat on the porch step while the night deepened around the ranch that they were both, in their different ways, going to build their future on. They told Clara the next morning. Clara received this news with an enormous breakfast, which was her method of processing important events, and then she interrogated Stephen for 20 minutes about his intentions, his plans, and his views on the importance of naming livestock. He answered all 3 with the seriousness they deserved. "If you are going to be my father," Clara said finally, in a tone of judicial finality, "you should know that I expect a pony by next spring." Eva started. "A small pony," Clara amended. "I am being very reasonable," Stephen said. "I think a small pony might be arranged if a small girl can demonstrate that she is responsible enough for one." Clara squared her jaw. "That is extremely fair," she said, and went outside to begin being demonstrably responsible. Eva looked at Stephen. "You have created a situation," she said. "I have created an opportunity," he said. She shook her head, but she was smiling. They were married in November, in the Harlow Creek church, on a clear, cold Saturday when the sky was the particular steel blue of late autumn in Kansas, and the trees along Main Street had gone bare and silver gray. Martha Orrin stood up with Eva, and Roy Caldwell stood up with Stephen, which Eva found perfect, and Roy accepted with a single nod as if the honor were nothing more than he expected. Tamaz sat in the front pew looking happy in the unself-conscious way of young men who genuinely enjoy other people's good fortune. Gus, who had driven the trail camp to Abilene, came in from his homestead 12 miles away and wore his best coat, which was only 10 years old. Clara walked down the aisle before Eva, carrying a small bunch of late autumn wildflowers that she had found somewhere with characteristic determination, and she delivered them to the front of the church with a dignity that made Martha Orrin cry quietly into her handkerchief. Eva walked to the front of the church in her good dress, which was deep blue and had been James's favorite, and she wore it without apology because she was not trading one history for another. She was building something new on top of everything that had made her who she was, and that was not a betrayal of anything. It was the most honest thing she could do. Stephen turned to watch her come down the aisle, and the look on his face was the kind of look that makes witnesses remember a wedding for the rest of their lives. The Reverend, a practical Kansas man named Horace Bell who married and buried and baptized the county with equal no-nonsense efficiency, performed the ceremony with appropriate brevity and the right words. When he said, "Do you, Stephen Underwood, take this woman?" Stephen said yes with a conviction that carried to the back of the church. When he said, "Do you, Eva Thatcher, take this man?" Eva said yes with a clarity and certainty that she felt in every part of herself. They were pronounced husband and wife, and Stephen kissed her in the church with considerably more expression than was strictly necessary, and someone in the back started to applaud, and then everyone was applauding, and Clara somehow got herself in between them both and was hugged by both of them simultaneously, which she pretended to be embarrassed about and was visibly not. The celebration afterward was at Martha Oren's house, which was larger than Eva's, and ran well into the evening with food and music and conversation. Roy Caldwell, who had consumed 2 glasses of whiskey rather than his usual one, told Stephen that he expected the spring calves to be outstanding, which was Roy's version of a wedding toast. Stephen thanked him seriously and meant it. Tamaz taught Clara a 2-step that she reproduced with such aggressive enthusiasm that 2 other children joined her, and then it became unclear who was teaching whom. Eva and Stephen danced once, properly, in the middle of Martha Oren's sitting room with the fiddle playing a waltz that Eva did not know the name of, and she thought that dancing with someone when you were completely certain of them was a different experience from any dancing she had done before. There was no performance in it. There was just movement and warmth and the particular pleasure of being exactly where you intended to be. The first winter of their marriage was quiet and deep and full of the particular kind of contentment that comes when 2 people who have both been alone for a long time discover how to be together without losing themselves. Stephen learned the rhythms of the house the way he had learned the rhythms of the ranch, attentively and without forcing. He had opinions and he expressed them, and Eva had opinions and she expressed hers, and when they disagreed, which happened, because both of them were people of strong views, they disagreed in the open and came to conclusions that were generally better than either position they had started with. He was genuinely good with Clara, which was not a small thing. He did not try to be James, and he did not try not to be James in a way that was itself a statement. He was simply Stephen, and he was present, and he listened to her and answered her questions, and occasionally challenged her to think harder about things that she thought she had figured out. Clara, who had never met a person who could outmaneuver her in argument, found this bracing and clearly enjoyed it. The pony was acquired in February, a small, sturdy mare of mixed breeding with a white blaze and a personality that was not entirely unlike Clara's. Clara named her Pearl and loved her with the ferocious dedication of a child who has wanted something for a very long time and is not going to waste it. The spring calves came in late March and April, 14 of them, and they were excellent, healthy, and well-conformed, carrying the quality of the Hereford bull into a crop that made Roy nod with satisfaction and made Eva stand in the calving pasture and feel something close to triumph. This was what James had wanted. This was what she had fought for. It was here. She told Stephen, standing at the fence looking at the pasture full of spring calves, that she felt like she was seeing the beginning of something. "You are," he said. "This is what the ranch looks like when everything is right. I want to expand," she said, carefully, "over the next several years. Buy the adjacent land when it comes available, improve the breeding program, build the herd to 150 head. That is a good plan," he said, "absolutely achievable. You are not going to argue with me about taking it slow," she said, slightly surprised. "I was going to suggest 180 head," he said. She laughed. "Let's start with 150 and see how we do." "Agreed," he said. He put his arm around her at the fence, and she leaned into him, looking out at the spring pasture and the calves and the good Kansas sky, and thought that this was the real answer to everything that had happened at the sale yard in the summer of 1878. Not the bull, not the money, not even the ranch. It was this: the standing together and looking at the same thing and building toward the same future. Summer came again, greener than the year before. Eva discovered she was expecting a child in late June, which she told Stephen one evening in the kitchen after supper when Clara was in bed. She said it simply, the way she said most important things, and watched his face. He was very still for a moment. Then he looked at her with an expression that she had never seen on him before, something unguarded and deep, and full of a happiness that he had clearly not been prepared to feel. He crossed the kitchen and put his arms around her without saying anything, and she held on to him, and they stood in the kitchen for a long time in the lamplight. "Are you happy?" she asked, because she wanted to hear it. "Eva," he said, his voice not quite steady, "I am the happiest I have ever been in my life." "Good," she said, "because I am going to need you at full strength. I am not planning to slow down much." He laughed, which was a wonderful sound. "I would not expect you to," he said. She told Clara in the morning. Clara received this news by sitting very straight at the kitchen table and thinking about it with visible intensity for approximately 30 seconds. "A brother or a sister?" she asked. "We will not know until it comes," Eva said. "I would prefer a brother," Clara said. "Sisters are more complicated." "How would you know?" Eva said. "Martha Orrin has 3, Clara said. "I have observed." Stephen, at the stove, appeared to be deeply engaged in whatever he was doing with the coffee. Clara sat with the news a little longer. "Will I still get to ride Pearl?" "You will still get to ride Pearl," Eva said. "A baby does not affect Pearl." "All right then," Clara said, and went back to her breakfast with the matter apparently resolved. The pregnancy went well through the summer and into the fall, and Eva continued to run the ranch with the same competence she had always had, which Stephen supported without interference, and with a practical attentiveness that manifested as making sure she was never alone for long periods during the later months, and that the physically heavier work was always covered without it needing to be pointed out. Roy Caldwell, who had seen a great deal of life, behaved toward the situation with the same calm capability he brought to everything. He managed the fall cattle drive to Abilene that year himself, taking Tamaz and 2 hired hands and returning with prices that were even better than the year before. The operation was growing. The banknote was paid with room to spare. The adjacent 40 acres to the east came available in August, and Eva bought them, which was the beginning of the expansion plan. The baby came on a cold December morning, with a winter storm making noise at the windows, and the house warm and close, and Martha Orrin in attendance. And it was a boy, solid and loud and evidently entirely healthy. Stephen held his son for the first time in the kitchen rocker, with the storm outside and the lamp burning, and Clara perched on the edge of the table watching with enormous eyes. And Eva from the bed in the next room heard him say something low and quiet that she could not make out, and she thought it might have been a prayer or a promise or both. They named him James Thatcher Underwood, which was Eva's idea and which Stephen accepted without question, and with a gravity that told her he understood exactly what it meant. The name carried both the past and the present, which was what life was made of. Clara, presented with her brother, inspected him carefully and announced that he was smaller than she had expected, but that she supposed he would improve. Roy came to the door the day after the birth with his hat in his hands and said, "I am glad both are well," and then handed over a small carved horse that he had made himself, which he had apparently been working on for 3 months, and went back to the barn before anyone could say much about it. Tamaz came with a tamale from his mother's recipe that he had made himself and had clearly practiced, and was so transparently pleased about the birth that it made Eva genuinely happy for 2 separate reasons. The winter closed around the Thatcher Underwood ranch, warm and full and complete. James Thatcher Underwood, known as Jamie from approximately his 3rd week of life, turned out to have his father's gray-green eyes and his grandmother's stubborn jaw, and a disposition that was sunny unless it was suddenly and dramatically not, which kept everyone on their toes. He grew well and quickly. Clara, after a brief period of observing him with scientific detachment, decided somewhere around his 2nd month that she found him acceptable, and began to take a proprietary interest in his development that manifested as a great deal of unsolicited opinion about his progress. The ranch grew with its children. The spring of 1880 brought the best calf crop the operation had ever seen, 22 calves, all of them excellent, carrying the Hereford Bull's quality in their conformation and their constitution. Duke, as he was by now universally called regardless of Eva's original position on the matter, was 6 years old and still fully authoritative in the south pasture, and showed no signs of diminishing. Stephen took on an additional hired hand that spring, a quiet young man from Missouri named William, who turned out to be gifted with horses in the way that some people simply were. With Roy managing the cattle side and Stephen handling the overall operation and William developing the horse end of the business, the ranch was becoming exactly the thing that Eva had always believed it could be. Roy's health was good, but he was not young, and Stephen was careful about the balance of his workload in a way that Roy would not have tolerated from anyone except someone he genuinely respected. There was an afternoon in late April when Eva came to the barn and found the two of them sitting on upturned crates mending harness in the good spring light, talking about nothing in particular, and she stood outside for a moment and watched them, and thought that this was one of the best things she had ever built. The town of Harlow Creek continued its gradual evolution. A new general store opened. The school expanded, which was directly relevant to Clara, who was now in her 11th year, and had opinions about education that the schoolteacher found both admirable and occasionally exhausting. Eva served on the school board committee that was formed to discuss the expansion, and found that she had a capacity for local civic engagement that she had not previously had time to discover. Stephen, for his part, was slowly becoming a known figure in the county, not prominently, because that was not his nature, but in the way that a genuinely capable and straight-dealing man becomes known in a community where such qualities are recognized and valued. He sold cattle to people he respected at prices that were fair, and he did not sell to people he did not respect, and after a while this policy became understood and accepted as simply part of who he was. In the late summer of 1880, a drought threatened the region. The creek that ran through the south quarter of the Thatcher Ranch dropped to half its usual depth, and neighboring properties that were not as well situated suffered more significantly. Eva and Stephen made the decision to share water access with two neighboring families who were in difficulty: the Morrises, who had been farming nearby for 5 years, and an older couple named the Havorsons, who had been there longer than anyone and whose small cattle operation was their entire livelihood. The water access cost them some, but not more than they could bear, and it was the right thing. Stephen said this simply when they discussed it, without elaboration, and Eva agreed without needing it elaborated, and that was that. The Morrises and the Havorsons never forgot it. The drought broke in late September and the fall was green again, and the cattle were healthy, and the Abilene market was strong, and the year ended in the black. Clara, 11 years old, wrote an essay for school about the drought, and about the decision her parents had made to share the water, and her teacher sent Eva a note saying it was the finest piece of writing she had received from a student in several years. Eva read the note twice and then showed it to Stephen, who read it once and put it on the mantelpiece without saying anything, but with an expression that said everything. Winter came again, and with it the particular deep quiet of the Kansas plains under snow, which Eva had always loved. The house was warm and full of the sounds of children and the particular domestic happiness that is made of ordinary things, meals and fires and bedtime stories, and the comfortable presence of someone beside you who knows you completely and remains. One evening in February, with the snow falling steadily outside and Jamie asleep and Clara reading by the lamp, Stephen looked at Eva across the kitchen table and said, "Are you happy?" She looked up from the account book she had been reviewing. She looked at the lamp and the snow-covered windows and the room around her that was alive with the things that mattered. "Yes," she said. "Are you?" "More than I thought I was allowed to be," he said. "You are allowed to be," she said. "You have earned it." He reached across the table and took her hand, and she turned her hand over and held his, and they sat in the lamplight while the snow fell on the Kansas prairie outside, and there was nothing more that needed to be said. By the spring of 1881, the ranch had grown to 112 head of cattle, and the expansion to the east pasture was fully operational, and the horse breeding side of the operation that William had developed was beginning to generate its own reliable income. Eva's calculations for the next 3 years were the most optimistic she had written since before James died, and they were not wishful thinking. They were grounded in exactly what she had built. She stood in the pasture on a morning in early April with the spring calves around her, and the bull moving through the herd with his unhurried dignity, and she thought about the summer of 1878, the sale yard, the dust, the auctioneer's gavel coming down and the sound of it traveling through her chest. A stranger had walked over in a dusty sale yard and told her to take the thing she had worked for, when she had nothing left to pay for it with, and she had not known then that the act was the beginning of everything. She had not known that the man would be everything James had been and other things besides. She had not known that the ranch would come back not just to what it had been, but to something better than it had ever been. She had known only that she was going to keep fighting, because she did not know another way to be. Stephen came up beside her. He had been at the far end of the pasture checking the fence line, and he had come back across the field in the morning light, and she watched him come with the easy pleasure of a woman who is perfectly secure in what she sees. "The east fence is solid," he said. "Good," she said. He stood beside her and looked at the calves and the bull and the good grass of the April pasture. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "The sale yard," she said. 3 years ago. He was quiet for a moment. "I think about that day too. What do you think about it?" "I think about what would have happened if I hadn't asked around," he said. "If I'd just taken the bull and left town. I think about the very small chance that any of this happens." He looked at the ranch around them. "It almost didn't." "But it did," she said. "It did," he agreed. She took his hand, and they stood in the pasture in the April morning, and the spring calves moved through the good grass around them, and the Hereford bull that had started everything moved between them with the calm authority of an animal who has done everything that was asked of him. Clara came running from the direction of the barn in her boots, Pearl trotting behind her on a lead rope because Clara took Pearl essentially everywhere, shouting something about one of the new calves that demanded immediate parental investigation. Jamie, 2 years old and currently being managed by Roy, could be heard in the distance contributing enthusiastically to some situation at the water trough. Stephen and Eva looked at each other. "Parental investigation required," he said. "It seems so," she said. They walked toward the barn together, hand in hand in the April morning, on the land that Eva had almost lost and had instead made into something that would last. And behind them, the calves moved through the spring grass on the ranch that was finally and completely and irrevocably theirs. There would be more years after this one. There would be more droughts and market swings, and the ordinary difficulties that the land offered as a matter of course. There would be the year when the East Quarter needed a new well, and the year when the horse operation expanded into something that drew buyers from 3 counties, and the year when Clara, at 16, revealed the essay she had written about her mother that would eventually be read at the Harlow Creek School exhibition to a full house. There would be the morning when Roy Caldwell retired, fully of his own choice, to a small house in town that Stephen and Eva helped him furnish, and the long Sunday dinners he came to after that until the end of his days. There would be the day Jamie turned 12 and announced with complete conviction that he intended to be a rancher, which surprised no one, and the day he turned 14 and added that he also intended to improve on the current breeding program, which surprised everyone a little and delighted Stephen completely. There would be another child, a daughter this time, born in the spring of 1883, dark-haired and loud and full of the same particular determination that ran through the women of the family. Clara named her Rose, which was an act of naming that Eva accepted with less resistance than she had ever applied to Duke the Bull, and Stephen accepted immediately and completely. There would be evenings on the porch in the summer dusk, Stephen's arm around her, and the sounds of the ranch settling around them, talking about tomorrow and the week after and the year after that, which was the most intimate form of certainty there was. There would be 23rd anniversaries and 41st years on the land, and the long-settled deep happiness of two people who had each been alone, and had found each other not in the first fresh season of life, but in the harder, more tested middle of it, and who had built something that was the better for having been built by people who knew what it meant to almost lose everything. All of that was coming. For now it was April of 1881, and Eva Thatcher Underwood was walking across her pasture with her husband, toward her daughter and her son and the life she had fought to keep, in the Kansas spring that smelled of new grass and rich earth and the particular sweetness of things that had been earned. She squeezed Stephen's hand. He squeezed back, and the ranch, warm and alive and entirely itself, held them both.